So this is an old clip. This is from last year, but somebody uploaded it again recently in the Fire and the Kids subreddit. So big up the homeless cats over there. This is an interview with Tim Dillon and Brendan Schaub on his obviously very widely popular Tim Dillon Show podcast. I really recommend you check it out. Tim Dillon's definitely one of my favorite comedians out at the moment. An absolute fire breather of a comedian. If you're a fan of Bill Burr and that sort of style of comedy, definitely check out Tim Dillon. He sat down with Brendan Schaub and had a bit of an interview, and towards the end they sort of like spoke about, I don't know why it was at the end, but he essentially kind of quizzed him on his kind of upbringing or his sort of start in comedy, and you know, how he essentially got to the position that he's in now. And it kind of got me thinking about maybe about the reason why some people hate Brendan Schaub to the level that they hate him, because I've been kind of observing the Fire and the Kids subreddit from a distance for a while, especially during lockdown. And you know, of course, during lockdown, you know, the Fire and the Kid have gone through a bit of a stressful time. You know, Brian Cannon's essentially been cancelled, allegations of rape. Brendan Schaub was you know, accused of sliding into girls' DM early in the year, but he sort of like skated around that expertly, and he's just been generally been, you know, taken the piss out of in general by people in the comedy space, because I don't think it's funny and because I think it's a bit of an oath. But the hate has been really consistent with Brendan Schaub throughout the entire lockdown, right? Of course, most of it has been his own fault. He says some really dumb stuff about COVID and lockdowns and comedy and, you know, just generally how he's just approached things. Of course, the scandal with Chris D'Elia, people weren't really a fan of how he sort of reacted to that. The crying on camera, not calling his friend directly, you know, blah, 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 the deleting of Brian Cannon's name on the bio of the Fire and the Kid because they sold the rights to whatever that cast media group is, whatever it is that control it. Loads of things that you could have a reason to really not dislike the guy, I guess. But some of the consistent levels of kind of dislike and hatred towards him haven't really dipped in any way, shape or form. It's been a consistent kind of uprising, and you know, there'll be a moment where it'll kind of level out, but it just keeps going up and up and up and up. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the fact of how he made it in comedy. I just think I don't know what it is, but it seems like stand-up comedy fans or fans of that whole stand-up comedy podcast scene are really tied or attached to comedians' sort of like origin story and the group they're kind of coming up from, and you know, funny stories about them told in third person on other shows, whatever it may be, but they're really tied into it, right? And they're really keen fans of stand-up too. So when they hear a story of Brendan Schaub essentially skipping steps to get what he's got to, of course, his relationship with Joe Rogan has basically played a huge role in terms of allowing him to reach the audience he's maybe reached, and of course his own hard work, blah, 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 blah. They definitely they kind of, I guess it feels like they take it personally that he's gotten as far as he has gotten to, when some of their other faves in the scene are, you know, languishing in, you know, open mics and dingy restaurants somewhere where no one's basically watching. So I guess that's where I kind of think it coming from. And again, this is a clip where he kind of details his kind of come up in the scene, and I'm going to comment on it on the other side. So this is from the Tim Dillon Show, episode number 174.
Meet him
like 6-7 years ago.
Were you doing stand-up then, or you just met him before?
No, met him and then started doing the Fire and the Kid, then took that on the road, and that's when I started doing stand-up.
So Fire and the Kid's been around for 6 years.
6 years.
And then you guys developed a huge fan base right out the gate, and then took that on the road. And when did you meet Rogan?
Met Rogan. I mean, well, remember Rogan was a UFC commentator.
Of course.
So when I was fighting the UFC, me and Rogan were boys.
Okay.
And then we got really close when I moved to LA.
Right.
And then him and Brian were the ones who were like, do stand-up.
When did you first do stand-up?
I first did stand.
And again, it does feel like a bit of a grilling. It does feel like Tim Dillon's being a little bit patronizing, but you know, the questions need to be asked.
And would be, yeah, I mean, first time we did a live Fire and the Kid. Because we did it at Brea Improv, 550 people. That was my open mic. And Brian was like, oh, you're going to go out and you do 10 minutes stand-up. You're going to go out and do 10 minutes. He was like, so every show we're going to start doing this. This can be your open mic.
And how did the first one go?
Not great.
Right.
Not great. I mean, not, you know. It's,
right.
But that's the thing. People are like, oh, you didn't have to do the open mic thing where no one's around. I'm like, well, hold on. You mean open mics where it's full of other comics hating on the comics who are performing? My open mic was in front of 550 people, tons of pressure.
Yeah.
that's where the problem is, right? Because it wasn't really tons of pressure because you're performing. It was pressure to some extent because pressure is pressure, but it wasn't the same sort of pressure as going in a open mic in a bar where no one knows who you are, doesn't really appreciate your presence, didn't know there was going to be comedy on the night, and then having to convince them to listen to you and also convince them that you're funny and entertaining. That's a completely different skill, and of course, it allows you to probably develop as a comedian in a far more, I wouldn't say organic way, but in a far more well-rounded way, right? Of course, he's performing in front of people, right? People's people. But when you're performing in front of podcast fans who are just, you know, who kind of hang on your every word, who know all your little idiosyncrasies and your little ticks and stuff that are humorous to them, there's no real failing. You could do poorly, of course, you know. Public speaking in any regard, in any way, shape or form, is difficult. Even if you're talking to a brick wall, it's hard to kind of keep a conversation flowing and make it entertaining and have structure to it and all that sort of good stuff. But there's no denying there is a complete night and day between an actual comic going through the tried and tested route of becoming good at stand-up and what he basically done. Now, the only sort of you know, thing that I'd kind of give him on this is that I think going forward, what will end up happening, in my opinion, which is you're seeing happening a lot now with the younger comedians, especially with the whole advent of podcasting and the fact that you can build and cultivate a fan base via YouTube, via podcast, via social media platforms pretty quickly, and to a very sort of like to a grand scale, if you want to. I think we're going to see a lot more Brendan Schaubs coming up in the scene. People who sort of cultivate a fan base, decide to pivot into stand-up comedy, and then kind of straight away have a big fan base. You see it a lot with these sort of like TikTok comedians, right? Like, I can't think of their name of this person, but there's one girl who's always talking about being Latina, right? I forgot her name. People always take the piss if she's talking about being Latina. That kind of comedy isn't really something that you see outside of social media anyway. It's a certain type of comedy. But if she decides to start doing straight stand-up, she's going to have, you know, however many millions of people I follow on social media as her captive audience straight off the bat, and they're going to be very receptive to whatever material that she puts out there because they're fans of her as a person. So I think stand-up comedians and fans of comedy will have to kind of grapple with this new breed of comedian entering the space who isn't quite, you know, what they were expecting or used to in previous years, but they're kind of doing it in a different sort of, or they're not what they're used to, and they're also doing it in a different way. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad way they're doing it. It just means they're not going to be maybe as polished as the person that you're used to, because they've spent 5-6 years not being famous, touring the country, you know, in bumfuck places and doing shows in front of nobody, honing their craft, and then by the time they become famous enough for you to notice them, they've perfected their skill. Now, of course, with a person like Brendan Schaub, he's sort of learning in public, so it's hard to sort of have a fair opinion on his level of stand-up. There is obviously an idea of thinking, I've read somewhere online where people say it's difficult for people. I've heard someone say that it's very difficult for somebody over the age of, let's say, 28 or something, who wasn't funny, who wasn't, like, you know, on stage doing stuff, to just get funny straight away. It's just a hard thing to learn as a skill, especially when they kind of skip the steps, when you haven't gone to do open mics and all this sort of stuff, and into competitions and what they called showcases and all this sort of stuff. You've just gone immediately in front of your audience base. And then he had the other error again, which I think what he done, which probably didn't help his career, well, which didn't help his perception with fans. I think his career is completely fine, right? He drives a Porsche and lives in a mansion. He's doing pretty well. What didn't help how he's perceived was the fact that he decided to take that Showtime special that was kind of given to him, 3-4 years in his stand-up journey. He probably should have waited a longer time to do it. But I understand, you know, when you get given the opportunity to do a special with Showtime, and I'm assuming the whole below the belt stuff was probably tied in with that, an idea that he'd become like a Showtime, you know, personality and all this sort of stuff. It's just too good to turn down. And then I think any rational person, anyone with a bit of a common sense, would probably take the deal too, even if you're not ready, hoping that you just can turn up on the day and really show out. So he explains a bit of it now.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Now, and then your first special was Showtime. How many years after that?
3.
Do you feel like when
3
you
and
look
change.
back, do you say, That was a crazy fast.
Crazy.
Crazy fast.
Insane.
To do a special that
Insane.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah, it's
Nuts.
wild. Would you do another one tomorrow?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'd probably wait 2 years. I might do something, but not a hour special.
When you look back at the special, how do you feel about it now?
Everyone
hates everything they do.
I hate everything. I hate on my podcast. I hate my set I'm gonna do tonight. I hate the set I'm gonna do tonight. I hate everything.
Yeah.
I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what I accomplished short amount of time.
Yeah.
I think
crazy.
I think I'm the fastest person to get a big network special in under a certain amount of years.
Right.
Which is a blessing and a curse. But yeah, I'm proud of it. For sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And again, that's why I think where he loses people. I think the beginning bit is where is the Brendan that we probably should see more to probably win over more of the detractors, let's say. But he does have this sort of chip on his shoulder and this sort of like false sense of confidence because of the success of the podcast, because he sells out shows in places where he can. I think Joey Diaz spoke about it a few times, where Joey Diaz said something along the lines of some of his older shows. I think back on the church, he used to say something like, oh, it's really dangerous for an up and coming comedian to hang out with too many successful comedians, because you're both doing the same thing. You stand on the stage holding a microphone telling jokes. You somehow get this false sense of security, or you get this false sense of idea or status, or position, that you're similar, you're the same. Like, because you speak to Bill Burr at the Comedy Store car park, you somehow think that you're the same person, you're the same level, when you're not, right? He's obviously far ahead of what you're doing in talent, in experience, whatever it may be. So it's quite advantageous just to kind of stick with the people who are at the same experience level as you, got their training wheels on, 2 years in, 5 years in, doing shitty shows in and around. That's who you should be spending your time with day in, day out, to hone your craft and to kind of keep the fire burning in that regard. Kind of hanging out with all the Hollywood types kind of diminishes your idea of how you look at yourself and your craft. And I think that's what's happened to Brendan, because obviously he's close friends with Joe, and being friends with Joe automatically gets you in with everybody else in the Comedy Store because they want to be nice to you because you're Joe Rogan's friend, all that sort of stuff. So that doesn't help. And then of course him not wanting to say out loud that thinks his first special was crap, which it was. Admittedly, I think all the reviews could basically get attest to it, which is, it's not fair to ascribe of reviews, because reviews can be a bit skewed. You look at the reviews that Dave Chappelle's special get, and kind of compare the audience reviews to the critics reviews. Not one thing, but in general, the audience reviews of Brendan Schau's special, you'd be surprised, are really bad, right? And it wasn't a good special. There weren't many jokes in there, mostly stories he's told on the podcast, tried to speak in a humorous manner that really weren't that great, and it just seemed rushed. It seemed like he wasn't ready for it. It wasn't a memorable thing. He never really speaks about it himself, so I think he knows deep down that it wasn't good. So it's hard to admit it in front of a peer that he did a bad job. I understand it, but it will probably serve him better for his image and for his likability, if that is even important, if he cares about that, to basically admit his sort of faults and where he sort of falls short, and basically be like, hey, I'm just learning out loud. It's not the conventional way to do it, but hopefully I want to get to a level where I'm of the same standard of people I look up to, X, Y, Z, and E. But I think because it feels like he's sort of gaming the system, people tend to kind of not like him as a person. That's probably what I kind of gleaned from this. Again, this is just my interpretation from what I saw in this small clip of this interview, but I'd love to know your thoughts, man, because there's a lot of people that aren't really big fans of Brendan and go out their way to make his life a living hell. But I'd love to know what you think about the situation. What do you think? Do you think he rushed his career? Do you think there's anything he could do to kind of win you over if you are a Brendan Schaub hater, as he basically says, hater, right? I'd love to hear your thoughts regarding it. Let me know in the comments down below. Is there anything he could do to possibly win you over? And for the ones that think he's funny, do you think the hate that he gets is undeserved? Let me know as well in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts regarding that too.